Hi, I'm Paul Germain, and welcome to another session of Smart Boating. As you know, if you've watched the show before, we cover a wide variety of topics, from man overboard to electronics. And the general idea is to provide you with some information that will give you a better chance of making a smarter decision and having more fun on the water. Today we're going to take a slightly different trail, if you will, and we're going to look into the world of wood boat building. And joining us is a very knowledgeable guy in that area. His name is Brad Pease. Welcome, Brad.
Hey, Paul. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you again. We've got a really cool show here today, but before we get into it, can you share a little bit about your boating background and your current involvement in the industry?
Yeah, thank you. So I have been really blessed in having a lifelong passion and career in wooden boats, primarily. And I've been a boat builder for about 40 years. My brother and I had a boat yard in Chatham on Cape Cod. And we specialized in wooden boats. I also was a licensed captain, so I got to go out and play in the boats on a regular basis. And have owned several really beautiful classic yachts myself. I was very lucky.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Are you still involved in the industry?
Yeah. So I went into retirement and decided that that was not a good idea for me. So I have a new career in with Block Island Maritime Funding, which is a nonprofit vessel donation foundation. And so we fund various maritime charities through donations.
Excellent. So you've got a lot of great background in this area, so why don't we get right into the show?
Cool.
You know, when we talk about building something, it could be an office building, it could be a cathedral, it could be a house. Oftentimes the builder gets some inspiration from a certain point. And I'm wondering, we've got a photo of a small boat here. Did this provide any inspiration for you in some of the boat building you did?
Yeah, so this was we had, our boat yard was in Chatham, a beautiful waterway, lots of inland waters and marshes and such. So we designed this boat. We called it the Mill Pond Skiff, and it's a 16.5-foot boat for tootling around on the inland waters.
Okay.
And it was great, but it wasn't perfect, but it was great for what that was.
All right.
So this is another example of inspiration. This is a boat that we designed and built called the Monomoy First Light, 26 feet. Lap strake. It's a very traditional looking boat, but it's actually built with modern wood construction, which is a wood composite with a lot of epoxy. But so this, what I wanted to create next was something that was in between the first boat and this boat.
See. Right.
And I needed a boat shop to do it in, so I had to build a boat shop.
Makes sense.
I had retired, so the old boat yard was in other people's hands by then.
Right.
So moving right along, we start with some plans, a little view of part of the workshop, and the boat plans, and
so those dictate the length, the width, the depth, materials, the angles, that sort of thing. Right?
Yep, it gives a really good concept of it, and it gets you to begin with the basic parameters.
Yeah, you get like a true north. And what's this?
And this is the beginning of a boat project. It's called a strongback. So the strongback is sort of the foundation of what you build it on, and it's built to the length of the boat, and it also, these cross timbers mark where the different mold stations are, which dictate the shape of the boat.
Yes.
And here we go. We have an example of those molds set up in place. And you can begin to sort of get an idea. I mean, they're a little weird, but you can see, well, that's kind of some shape of a boat there somewhere. And here we go. You can start seeing the molds in sequence. And we're beginning to flesh it out with some of the structure. So we've got the stem, keel, chine, and shear clamp going onto these molds. It begins to look a little bit more like a boat. And we just could continue with that idea. You can see the molds set up. Now we're beginning to add some frames. Even between the molds, there's a couple pieces of lumber, which add to the structure and the strength and the shape. Here we go, another perspective. This one continues to show what we just did, but also the second mold in is actually a permanent bulkhead.
right.
which will eventually lead into the forward cuddy
Yes,
under
yes.
the foredeck. But that's nice to build into it from the start because all the pieces that go over it get glued and bonded to it, so it becomes very strong. And here we begin the process of sheathing the boat. Now we got the framework there, now we're adding the plywood sheathing, which goes on in layers. And you can begin to see the shape, how difficult it is to bend some of these pieces of plywood over these curves, these radiuses, and we call that torturing the plywood, and it's pretty well named. Here's another example. Now you're starting to see the plywood has to bend over these curves, so you have to use relatively thin pieces of plywood.
Yes.
So a sequence of 3 or 4 layers that are bent,
Right.
glued to
Yes.
each other.
Like a laminate.
It's a laminate, and this begins to show you the different layers and how it begins to connect with other layers. Everything's staggered so that the glued area becomes just as strong or stronger than the original plywood. Here we go, just another perspective. Now you start to see the shape of the top sides. The bottom is coming together. Here we go. The forward end is the most difficult because it has the most tortured curves, radiuses in it. So it takes more effort. In the gluing process, all these little chunks on there are actually screws going through blocks that act as clamps. So it makes sure that the glue bond between the layers is sufficient. Here we go. Now we're starting to see the forward end finished off, a little epoxy fairing, and we're starting to lay out the other planks, that's what those lines are that we see going fore and aft. Maybe another perspective here. Here we go. Looking down the length of the boat, you start thinking, well, they kind of look like plank lines, maybe, although they're hollow. Here we go. So this is an example of how we make long pieces of plywood out of short pieces of plywood, and this is called a scarf. Yeah, and the scarf is a 10 to 12 to 1 angle that the 2 pieces are bonded together with. It ends up being the exact same thickness of the plank, but it's actually even stronger than the rest of the plank.
Interesting.
If done correctly, of course. Here we go. Okay, so now we have the first plank is installed. It's bonded up to the inner chine, which is connected to the bottom. Another perspective of that first plank getting installed and fit. There we go. So with that first plank fit and the bottom done, we saturate it with epoxy. And then we sheathe it with fiberglass cloth in a bed of epoxy. And this provides not only strength, but it provides chafe resistance. So it sort of allows that whole bottom section to be a very strong, watertight, resilient unit. And this is an example of one of the planks being fit and shaped. And if you see this notched out area on this flank, it's called a gain in a plywood. Well, in a lap strake boat, these gains are installed on the hood ends, that's at the end of the plank. And if you look closely at a lap strake boat, you see those those laps that look a lot like clapboard. But at the ends to the stem, it disappears. It just sort of flows into the stem. This is how it's done, with one of these on one plank and one of these on the other plank, and they come together and it just melds perfectly. This is this just shows the bottom is now epoxied and the first strake is, and we're starting to fit the second plank. And another perspective of that.
Is there anything particularly tricky about that particular part of the process?
Well, it's all a little tricky. It is. The beauty of a wooden boat is that it's all handcrafted, and the challenge of a wooden boat is it's all handcrafted. Right. Everything takes time. You have to be very thoughtful. There's nothing that's popped out of you know, a machine or anything.
Right,
You really
right.
have to do a lot of handwork. So there is a constant bevel between the planks. There's a constant bevel that you have to pay attention to. And then once it's in place, each plank is glued and screwed onto the framing and the next plank. Here's an example. This is the shear plank forward getting fit. Another view of sort of the same process, different perspective. Here's a little bit of a detail of sort of how those notches are, so that the very forward end of those planks sort of go into one smooth surface
Right at the stem.
as they expand back out. And this is one of the planks getting fit. It's laying out exactly where that cut's going to go. And this is an example of a plank section. Now when you look at a boat, a lap strike boat, you might look and you say, oh, that's a nice smooth, fair,
Right.
straight kind of run of a
Yep.
piece of wood. The reality is once you pull it off of that curved hull, this is the shape it actually is. It's a big, long S curve. And so I think it's a very interesting perspective. And we
Yes.
see that I've been playing around with that gain on this one to make sure it's going to fit the next plank well.
Yep.
And here she is, almost planked up. She's just got the glue setting on that last plank. We call that the shear plank. And it's also the boat's sort of prepared, ready for some of the next level of framing, which we start to see here. So here we have the planks are in place, and we've installed the outer stem, which is that forwardmost piece, and the chine, the outer chine, which is also sort of a lift strip. In the
Okay.
performance of the boat,
Yes,
it helps.
right.
And you can see that. And everything's been glued and again sealed in epoxy for the longevity and the strength and the, you know. And here's just a perspective of the boat with these pieces in place. Again, it's just one step at a time. The bottom's been fiberglassed, epoxied. These things are epoxied. Now we're moving into a more finished section where we have the, it's been all epoxied, it's been sanded, now it's getting primed. There we go. Here she is, all primed up.
So you're priming over the epoxy at this point.
Yep, and it ends up making it's a great bond for a long-term durable finish. And so, of course, it's been built upside down because that's the easiest way to deal with all the planks and the clamping and this and that. But now we've got the rest of the boat to build and we have to turn it right side up. So this is just a perspective of the bottom from the stern, which we haven't seen much of.
Right.
And while it's upside down is the time to get the bonnet paint on.
Yep.
So
As well. Yep.
doing that. And another perspective of that.
Yep.
And it does, I didn't get into it, but it's got a nice little skeg section in this and that.
Okay,
It's all
yeah.
glued and bolted in place. Here we go. Now she's getting suspended up. I built a cradle sort of around the boat that you could basically turn it on its side and then
I
right
see.
side up.
All right.
And it was,
Multi-step operation.
yep, and it was just my wife and I, so
Okay.
we got some mechanical leverage.
Yep.
And here she is.
And White there. So
Yeah, she's
all right.
doing her bit,
Yeah.
asking me not to go out for coffee.
All right.
And there she is, right side up.
Right side up. Okay. The foundation you need to build out the interior.
Yep, and that's always a nice, a nice breaking point in the
Yes,
project. To
yes.
say, oh gosh, well the hull's done. Now we can start working on all the other details.
All right.
And here we go. This begins to show you the interior. Beautiful plywood. It's one of the things we like to do is to use very best of materials. There's so much that goes into the labor of it, you might as well spend the extra money for really good materials. So this is a really lovely marine plywoods, beautiful vertical grain fir, and some other things like Angelique and Ipe for some of the real structural things. This is, it's the beginning of sort of really seeing the interior coming together. We've got the interior frames, some floor timbers. This shows the forward bulkhead getting fit, and some of the framing that goes into these big knees up here in the corners. Will start delineating the shape of the eventual coamings.
Okay.
And here's another perspective at that stage. We start seeing the floor timbers in place, which adds strength and rigidity to the bottom, and it also supports the floor.
Okay.
Here we go, and just always, it's so important. You know, wooden boats have a reputation for, you know, having rot and you know, getting weak, and because these are all the old boats that we see over time. But a modern wooden boat uses the very best of woods and plywoods, and with the addition of the epoxy resins, not only bonding them together but also saturating them for finish, you end up with a incredibly lightweight, incredibly strong, and a boat that needs minimal finish.
Yeah, right. Now
so that's why we coat everything with the epoxy resin before we start painting.
Okay, now we have a little less than 10 minutes left, so we want to keep that time frame in mind as we look at the pictures.
We're gonna run through this. We've got a lot of great pictures. So the stern seating is starting to get framed out. The cockpit floor, it's all yellow cedar, beautiful old growth stuff. Forward perspective, the forward seats are starting to get framed out.
Okay.
Here we go with a little bit another, the seats are actually sheathed in this lovely plywood and edged with yellow cedar. Here we start seeing it again, kind
Those
of.
are the seats looking forward.
Yeah. And this is what the treatment I chose on this boat, which is a little fancy, but it emulates sort of a teak deck kind of look, where have the strips that are all fit within the.
These are the seats.
These are the seats. Yeah, and we'll see how that goes. Behind the scenes, you never see it, but in this case, in the forward end and the stern end, I put closed-cell foam for you know, for safety purposes in case something bad happened.
Right.
Okay, foredeck starting to get finished off. You get to start seeing that shape, a little paint on the inside, and never enough clamps in a boat shop.
Yeah.
Here we go with, again, the seating is more delineated and finished. Here's just a bit of detail. The console, which we'll see coming up, is the corners of it are built with these traditional corner posts, which are fashioned out of, you know, square chunks of wood, but you shape it down. You can see my little low angle plane here that does a lot of work with all the shavings. And here's this consoles coming together. The fuel tank was being fit under the forward seat, and you see these curves on the corner of the console. That's what those posts were we just saw. Okay, another perspective starting to come together. There we go. Now we're starting to see how those seats are going to be detailed. With the strips in the middle will be left natural and gray, and the edges will be all varnished.
Okay.
And we start to see some of the elements of finish that I like the image of a turn in the forward cuddy door, because this boat, this design, I call it the turn, and it also adds ventilation for the forecastle in a sort of a pretty way. Here we go. Here is interesting. A lot of boat builders do this stuff. We're looking at laminating the coamings. So the coamings take this a pretty hard radius, and
a lot of clamps.
we have to basically mold it and clamp it and glue it in thin pieces, but it ends up coming out beautiful, fair. Now
so
we can.
We have about 6 minutes left.
Okay, we start seeing how how she's finished out. The coamings and such, the varnish. Here's a perspective of her just before getting emancipated out of the shop.
Okay.
Here we are. She's out. She's on the trailer. She sees the light of day for the first time. And we brought her down so for building the boat, I bring it to some colleagues down at Writers Cove on Cape Cod that did a great job of installing a new Suzuki outboard, and they're excellent at what they do, so I let them do that.
Yeah.
I'll stick to the boat building.
How much power did you put on the boat?
So this boat, because it's this glued lap wood construction, it's relatively light, and the hull design, it's not a deep V, it's a modified V,
Yes, right.
so it doesn't take a lot of horsepower to move. So this boat boogies around comfortably at 16 to 18 knots, top end 20, 22 knots.
And how much
with
power?
30 horsepower.
30 horsepower, okay.
So it's very modest horsepower
Yes,
for an
very
18 and a half.
Very economical rig.
It is.
Yeah.
And here she is, the yellow one on the left is the latest one we just sort of walked through its construction.
Yes.
Next to a little sister. The previous boat that I built was a 17.5-foot version.
Oh.
Much simpler. The owner just wanted to go out and go birding in the marshes and this and that. So it has a tiller steering. It doesn't have the console. But you can see the similarities. They're in the same family.
Very much so, yeah.
And here's another perspective of them out there.
Yeah, so a traditional steering wheel on this.
Oh,
and
yeah, that
layout,
came from an antique store, as did some of the other bronze hardware, like the running lights. I don't know if you could look close, but the bronze teardrop port and starboard lights on there are antiques, with, of course, new LED lights.
That picture shows a hint of Cutty Hunk to me.
Yes.
That line, that kind of air about it, if you will.
That was a big inspiration. Was the Mackenzie Cutty Hunks that were notable bass boats for decades.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Here she is. It's launch day.
All right.
Here's the little lady keeping an eye on things. You can start to see her perspective, and I was really pleased at how she came out, not only performance-wise, but the aesthetics.
Yes.
I always feel like a boat is really wonderful when you can turn around and look at it and go, oh, that's a good-looking boat.
Right. I agree with that.
Just a good-looking boat.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So I felt like we accomplished that. And here we go, the builder, yours truly, did the sea trial and was really pleased at how she ran.
Nice angle of attack.
On her lines, as we say. You know, the bottom isn't, way up or way down or
right.
that stuff.
So you can notice that in that picture.
It happens.
Yeah.
And
very nicely.
And here's the happy wife. Miss Kitty is driving it for the first time and very happy with its performance as well.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite a chronicle there.
Yeah, I know. We just built the boat that took me 650 hours in like 20 minutes.
Right. Yeah, that's the end photograph there. So that's excellent. I mean, covered a lot of ground today, as you say. All that effort and custom craftsmanship in just a short period of time. But I think it helps people understand what goes into making a boat. That it just doesn't appear in the harbor on a mooring. That there's a lot of thinking, like you said, inspiration, and then you think it through, and then you build it carefully with all these different materials and so many different shapes on a boat. It's not like a house where everything's 90-degree angle. It's always complex shapes. So it's been very interesting to learn how you did it.
Yeah, thank you.
Before we end the show today, is there any place or any comments you have to share with people that viewed the show?
Sure. I think my time of 40 years or more building boats and stuff, it's been such a joy because it's been one man's passion and ability to sort of approach that wonderful point of form and function. I feel like boats in particular, whether they're wood or otherwise, but in particular wood, are just this beautiful combination of something beautiful to behold, but it also works.
Yes.
I mean, it just, it cuts
functions
through the water, it functions,
Yep.
it gets you places. Of course, they bring tremendous enjoyment to individuals and families when you can share them. So it's been great. Of course, it took me 40 or 50 years of learning and doing it, but if anybody wanted to get into it or explore it more, there's a couple resources.
Okay.
I found that the Wooden Boat magazine resource was one that was fabulous and very in-depth. It has you could go on their site. They have catalogs for designs. They've got catalogs and I think how-to
Yes.
videos and resources. A lot of books about boat building. I think there's the Small Boat Builder Journal as well,
Right.
which might be associated with the Wooden Boat.
Yes.
That also has a lot of wonderful resources.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, especially in today's day and age when handcrafted, domestically manufactured things are just very, very finite. It's a wonderful thing to do whether you're a professional, lucky enough to be a professional, and also lucky enough to have the time to do it as an amateur.
Yes. Yeah. It's just a neat hobby. Well, thank you for sharing that with us today. And thank you, Smart Boating viewers, for joining us. If you have comments or questions, please visit us at the website www.smartboatingus.com. Thank you.